No straps held the subjects down. The table lacked buckles. Restraints were unnecessary. The tea service on the cart ensured total compliance. It started with a structural failure. In October 1958, a foundation crew, led by a contractor named Grady Hicks, arrived at the Dunham estate. The county had ordered stabilization work on the East Terrace. The house had been vacant for 11 years. Hicks noted the soil was unusually loose near the wine cellar wall. He ordered a digger to clear the perimeter. The shovel hit masonry that wasn't on the blueprints. It wasn't a foundation stone. It was a false wall, bricked over with a different mortar than the rest of the house. When the crew broke through, the air that rushed out didn't smell like mold. It smelled sweet, sickly, heavy, and rancid, like meat left in the sun, masked by heavy perfume. Hicks crawled through the breach. He didn't find a dungeon, he found a larder. The room was 12 feet by 12 feet, lined with floor-to-ceiling shelving. The temperature was 20 degrees cooler than the outside air. There were no windows. The only light came from Hicks' flashlight, cutting through the stagnant dust. The beam landed on the glass. 17 crystal decanters sat on the central shelf. They were heavy lead glass, the kind used for fine brandy. Inside each one was a thick, clouded amber liquid. It had separated over time. A layer of white sediment rested at the bottom. A golden oil floated on top. They were sealed with wax and cork, airtight. Each decanter had a handwritten label tied to the neck with silk ribbon. The calligraphy was precise, elegant. The first one read, Subject, Nash, August 9th, 1931. Yield, 4 pints. Essence extracted. The dates spanned 16 years. The names were different on every bottle. Hicks radioed the sheriff. Sheriff Bishop arrived at 2 p.m. He secured the scene and called the county coroner. They cataloged the bottles. They photographed the room. In the corner, they found a stainless steel press. It looked like a cider press, but the basin was wider. The drainage spout was stained with the same dark amber residue found in the bottles. The coroner took samples of the liquid. The initial field test ruled out alcohol. It ruled out fruit preserves. The lab report came back 3 days later. The substance was 98% rendered adipose tissue, clarified fat. The essence wasn't metaphorical. It was the product of a slow, methodical reduction process. The investigation turned to the names. Nash matched a missing persons file from 1931. Sylvia Nash, 22 years old. A governess who had applied for a position at the Dunham estate. She was last seen at the train station. The family claimed she never arrived for the interview. The bottle on the shelf proved she did. The timeline emerged from the labels. 1931, 1932, 1934. The gaps were consistent. 1 bottle every 8 to 12 months. The victims fit a profile, educated, young, without significant family connections, tutors, accountants, librarians, people looking for advancement in a depression economy, people who wouldn't be missed immediately. The second room was discovered behind a heavy oak cabinet. This was the processing center. It was tiled in white porcelain like a hospital theater. In the center stood a modified surgical table. It had drainage channels cut into the surface. They led to a collection basin. The tools on the tray were silver-plated. There were no restraints on the table, No straps, no buckles. This confused the investigators until they found the tea service on a side cart. A silver pot, 2 cups, and a tin of loose leaf blend. The residue in the cup bottoms was analyzed. It contained high concentrations of chloral hydrate and arsenic. The toxicology report reconstructed the method. The victims weren't dragged down here. They walked. They were invited for tea during their interview. They drank. The chloral hydrate induced a twilight state. Paralysis without unconsciousness. They couldn't move. They couldn't speak. But they could see. The arsenic suggested a longer timeline. Low doses found in hair samples from the drainage trap indicated some subjects were kept for weeks. Weakened, softened, prepared. The layout of the room wasn't designed for conditioning. It was designed for harvesting. Efficient extraction of biological material. Eleanor Dunham was the matriarch, a widow since 1928. She was known for her heritage dinners. The society columns from the 1930s described them as the highlight of the season. Exclusive, lavish. Guests raved about the food, specifically the roasted vegetables and the confit. They complemented the rich, distinctive flavor. Receipts found in the estate office confirmed the purchase of hundreds of empty crystal cruets. These weren't just for storage. They were for service. The amber liquid was placed on the table, drizzled over dishes, passed among the county's elite. The Dunhams were feeding the missing to the wealthy. The quantity in the cellar was the surplus. The rest had been consumed. Based on the volume of the decanters and the number of dinners hosted between 1931 and 1947, the investigators estimated that over 200 guests had unknowingly participated in the degustation of the unsuspecting. There were no bodies. The estate grounds were scanned. The gardens were dug up. Nothing. Then they checked the furnace in the basement. It was an industrial coal-fired unit, oversized for a residential home. The ash pit was 3 feet deep. Forensic anthropologists sifted the ash. They found thousands of bone fragments, calcinated, crushed, the size of gravel. The heat had been intense enough to compromise the remains beyond identification, but the structural integrity of the calcium remained. 17 people had gone up the chimney as smoke. The name Prescott appeared on a bottle dated November 1941. Arthur Prescott, an architect. He had disappeared while surveying the West Wing renovations. The label noted, yield, 6 pints. Exceptional clarity. The cold, clinical nature of the text was the only insight into Eleanor Dunham's mind. No staff members were ever allowed in the cellar. Witness statements from former maids confirmed that Eleanor held the only key. She prepared the special sauces herself. She claimed it was an old family recipe, a secret blend of oils and herbs. The staff were forbidden from tasting it. The pattern held until 1947. The final bottle was different. The label was unfinished. It read subject, Oaks. October 14th, 1947. But the bottle was empty. The wax seal hadn't been applied. The cork was missing. Police records from 1947 showed a call to the estate on October 15th. A domestic accident. Eleanor Dunham was found dead at the bottom of the cellar stairs. The coroner at the time ruled it a fall. A broken neck, case closed. The 1958 investigation re-examined the photos from the 1947 death scene. They noticed something the original coroner ignored. Eleanor's hands were bruised. There were defensive wounds on her forearms. And near the processing table, a heavy iron ladle lay on the floor, dented. The timeline fell into place. October the 14th, 1947. Subject Oakes was scheduled for extraction. Julian Oakes, a young lawyer. He'd come to finalize a land deed. He drank the tea. But maybe he didn't drink enough. Or maybe his tolerance was high. The evidence suggested Oakes woke up. The paralysis wore off mid-procedure. The dented ladle matched the shape of the fracture on Eleanor's skull in the autopsy photos. He didn't just fall, he fought. He struck the matriarch and ran. Julian Oakes was never seen again. His car was found at the train station 3 days later, keys in the ignition. He didn't go to the police. He didn't go home. He vanished. Likely terrified that no one would believe what happened in the cellar of the county's most powerful family. With Eleanor dead, the dinner stopped. The cellar was locked. The house passed to a distant nephew who lived in Europe. He never visited. The room sat in the dark, temperature controlled by the earth, preserving the collection for 11 years. The sheer volume of the operation was staggering. 17 bottles remained. Investigators estimated another 50 had been used. The entire social hierarchy of Loudoun County had been complicit in the literal consumption of the working class. The final piece of evidence was a silver serving spoon found behind the furnace. It was engraved with the Dunham crest. It was stained with the same amber residue. It had been thrown there, likely by Oakes, in his escape. A small domestic tool used for a monstrous purpose. The discovery destroyed the Dunham legacy. The estate was condemned. The assets were frozen. The families who had attended the dinners quietly purged their guest books and burned their invitations. No one wanted to be linked to the heritage menu. The names on the bottles were released to the public. Families who had waited decades for news finally had answers. They received death certificates, but no bodies. Just a line in a report stating their loved ones had been processed. The house was demolished in 1960. The locals wouldn't go near it. They said the soil tasted like grease. The demolition crew reported a sweet, sickly smell when they tore down the chimney. The bottles were placed in evidence storage. Over time, the separation worsened. The sediment turned black. The oil turned gray. The preservation failed once the seal was broken. The essence rotted just like any other meat. Julian Oakes remains a missing person. There is no record of him after 1947. Did he die in the woods? Did he change his name? He remains a mystery, the only man who knows exactly what Eleanor Dunham looked like when she realized her prey had teeth. The site is now overgrown forest. The foundation pit is filled with rainwater and leaves. But if you dig down past the roots and the mud, you can still find shards of crystal. Lead glass, heavy, expensive. And sometimes, hikers find strange things in the creek bed below the old estate. Smooth white stones that aren't stones at all. Fragments of bone that the furnace couldn't quite turn to ash. The horror wasn't just the death. It was the reduction. The idea that a human life, with all its memories and ambitions, could be boiled down to 4 pints of oil and a label. The The coroner's final report on the liquid contents was 3 pages long. It detailed the chemical composition, fatty acids, lipids, traces of laudanum. It was a clinical dissection of a culinary atrocity. But the last line of the report was the most disturbing. It noted that the chemical profile of the oil suggested the subjects were kept in a state of high adrenaline for days before death. Fear improves the rendering. Eleanor knew that. The guests at the dinners described the flavor as sharp and electric. They thought it was exotic spices. They were tasting terror, distilled, bottled, and served on fine china. The Dunham estate is gone. The family name is dead. But in antique shops around Virginia, you can still find crystal cruets from the 1930s. Some of them have a faint amber stain at the bottom that no amount of scrubbing can remove. And if you hold them to the light, you might see the scratch marks on the inside. Marks made by a silver spoon, scraping out the last drop of what used to be a person. The case file is closed. The evidence is archived. The bottles sit in a box in the basement of the county courthouse, waiting for a dinner bell that will never ring again. We know what happened to the victims. We know what happened to the killer. The only thing we don't know is how many people walked away from those dinners, wiped their mouths with linen napkins, and never knew who they had just feasted upon.